Manish Tiwari. I've tracked him as a politician, as a parliamentarian for nearly 2 decades, as long as I've been a journalist covering policy, international relations, and also economy and politics. It's always a pleasure listening to him and reading his pieces. So congratulations on the book, sir.
Thank you.
And so over the next 30 minutes, we'll be talking about some aspects of the book which will, I'm sure, generate enough curiosity for all of you to go out and purchase the book. So Mr. Tiwari, congratulations. 4 books already, all critically acclaimed, and now here comes a book right at a time when you have a country raid a sitting president and abduct him and take him back. I mean, it's unprecedented, unheard of, and we are talking about it at that time. So you open, sir, in your book by arguing that a world adrift is forcing India into clear and consequential strategic choices, and that strategic clarity is not just desirable but necessary. These are your words. So when you look at Raisina Hill today, do you see a strategy, or is it a series of tactical firefights?
Well, I see an endeavor for strategic autonomy. So therefore, for any government, or for that matter, any foreign minister, this is not the most enviable position to be in. When I was writing this book and updating it, we finished somewhere around the 12th of December when the book finally went into publication. And between the 12th of December and the 12th of January 2026, the world has moved so quickly that some of the hypotheses, especially queer the United States, which may have been relevant 1 month back, are unfortunately not relevant any longer. So I think the struggle here is that how do we maintain our strategic autonomy? I don't think we are at a point in time where even if we do desire, and even if there is a will, there is room and space to make those strategic choices. I think it would be premature. And so therefore, for anyone who is at the helm of things, what they really need to be doing, and I think that's what any government would do and governments around the world are doing, is to ensure that whatever space that they have, that remains preserved and protected.
So I'm going to move ahead and talk about a paragraph from your book where you write that India therefore lives along with substantial parts of the rest of the world in absolutely unprecedented times. You were talking about that 1 month where things changed far more quickly. We are not witnessing a managed transition from one global order to another. We are living through an interregnum, a turbulent pause with no promise of resolution. What was that moment when you felt that the post-1945 order had truly ended and that we have entered into a new one?
Let me answer that question by prefacing it with what really are the 5 broad themes that run through this book. First of all, if at all there was a post-World War II order, and I deliberately use those words consciously, that has completely collapsed. You are living in an orderless world. So therefore, obviously, the transition is going to be extremely messy. The second broad theme, and you would find that running across the book, across various chapters, is the relentless rise of China. Now going back to 1978, the rise of China has been relentless. And unfortunately, it has turned potentious also. The third theme which runs through the book is that India, if it has to preserve its strategic autonomy, must remain internally cohesive. Pluralism is no longer a luxury which can be taken for granted. India's cohesion is its biggest antidote to the external challenges that will continue to buffet us. Number 4, there's been a revolution in military affairs. There's been a transformation that has been unprecedented. And what happened between the 7th and the 10th of May 2025, the kinetic actions between India and Pakistan, demonstrate as to how that paradigm has completely changed. So no longer can you fight the battles of the present with a mindset of the past and weapons of the past. You've moved from an informationized to an intelligencized battlefield. And you need to be really cognizant of that. And 5th, there is a flux. There is a vacuum which has opened up. Now, who is going to fill that vacuum, or if at all that vacuum is going to be filled, is a question which I don't think anyone has an answer to. But to circle back to where you started from, so I spent about 3 years in Washington, D.C. as a distinguished senior fellow with the Atlantic Council. My term overlapped with the first Trump presidency. And when you would speak to folks in Washington, D.C., policy folks, people in the administration then, the singular feeling that you would come away with is that the United States is exhausted. After 2 wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, there was a yearning to withdraw. And so therefore it was very clear to me as far back as 2016 or 17 that if the US withdraws from its role as the single outside balancer of power in the world since 1945, there would be a collapse of that order. What I did not anticipate and foresee is that the US itself would undercut that order. And so therefore, from a situation where a withdrawal could have been managed, because President Trump during his first term had started talking about NATO doing the heavy lifting, 2% of GDP contribution by NATO countries. So the signs were all there. Yes, for him also to unravel what had been built by his predecessors between 45 and 2016, I don't think was really easy. And but when he came back the second time, I think a conscious choice had been made that they will not only withdraw, but behave in a unilateral manner, as Yashwantji was saying, withdrawal from 66 multilateral institutions, what happened in Venezuela. And this is just the beginning. The real challenge is going to be Greenland. How the Europeans react on Greenland is really going to determine whether even NATO survives. So therefore, the signs were all there, but I guess we were all hoping against hope that it would go away. And it did go away during the Biden presidency for a while.
So was there a sense then when you were on that fellowship that this will come so soon, in less than a year, in less than a decade? That was 2017 and now we are in 2026.
Well, as I said, we had COVID in between. So nobody thought that the world would survive COVID. And we survived COVID. I think we'll survive the next 3 years. So, but yes, after what happened on the 6th of January 2020, there was a sense that the former president would not be the next president of the United States. And the Biden administration definitely had taken a more internationalist view of things, their support to Ukraine and, some of their other actions in the Asia-Pacific region were far, far more internationalist. But what you've been seeing for the last 1 year is absolutely unprecedented. And that's why I'm saying you are back to the two percepts of the 17th century. Raison d'etre, Cardinal Richelieu, that every nation would act in its best interest. And in every nation acting in its best interest, you would possibly construct a world order, which would somehow hold the field. And then Hugo Grotius, the balance of power.
So how will India first, because you're looking at your own interest, self-interest as you said, if it is about India first, then what happens to the neighborhood first policy? Because again, a part of your book, and you talk about the question that you had in the Lok Sabha to the External Affairs Minister, you had asked, while India may have a neighborhood first policy, is there any neighbor of India which has an India first policy?
Yeah, well, I did ask the External Affairs Minister that, and there's a backstory to that. So we were at a conference some years ago, and there's a friend of mine who looks at South Asia very, very carefully. And he asked me this question. He says, you have a neighborhood first policy, but can you name a single one of your neighbors who has an India first policy? And that kind of set me thinking that perhaps there is a paradox somewhere. And when I tried to explore as to what really are the contours of India's neighborhood first policy, honestly, I was not able to find any real literature on it. The closest that I came was an answer which the Minister of State for External Affairs, Mr. Muralidharan, had given in 2019 to a question of mine, and an unstarred question, and there are many former ministers out here. They know exactly as to how unstarred questions are treated in government. But, he said that, we would walk the extra mile. There would be no reciprocity. We would invest in infrastructure. That was 2019. But between 2019 and 2024, things changed very rapidly in India's neighborhood also. And so I think, given the fact that we consider it our eminent domain, we really need to sit down, go back to the drawing board, and see as to what really can we do to get at least some, if not all, our neighbors. And I caveat that because we have a Western neighbor who is absolutely recalcitrant, whatever you may do. Nothing is going to work there. But the rest of the neighborhood, you need to really walk the extra mile.
Okay, so let's move from one neighboring country to another. On Bangladesh, you write about Sheikh Hasina's flight from Dhaka and the violence that followed, and you also note that, of course, this is with concern, Muhammad Yunus's remark that the Northeast could become an extension of the Chinese economy. How close are we in your assessment to real strategic vulnerability when it is about this entire Siliguri corridor?
Well, if your question is that have we lost Bangladesh, my answer is no. For the simple reason that, we invested blood and treasure in creating the country called Bangladesh. I mean, late Prime Minister Mrs. Indira Gandhi, 25 years after partition, redrew the political map of South Asia and created a new country. So therefore, I don't think that reality is really lost on the people of Bangladesh. Unfortunately, you have a government or a transitional government in Bangladesh which seems to be, for inexplicable reasons, if I can use the word, belligerent towards India. And for the life of me, I am not able to understand as to why they may have a grouse with the government which was there previously. But to extrapolate that grouse to include India, it defies any logic. And so therefore, I think if we play it right and play it cautiously, Bangladesh is a country where we have a great emotive connect, and therefore it would be very much back within our eminent domain. So I do not see the current turbulence as something of permanence which will not allow us to get into a situation of normalcy. It may not be what we had with Sheikh Hasina, but yes, it would be a far more equitable situation than what we have currently.
Okay, but you also say that there is no greater danger today than the fires being lit across India's neighborhood, each spark threatening to ignite a blaze at India's own doorstep. So if you rank in terms of how concerned should we be, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, Maldives, which is one country do you and of course Pakistan, which is one country you think that really has, and China has us worried?
Look, Sri Lanka 2022,
yes.
Bangladesh 2024, Nepal 2025. Right? You saw regime changes take place as a consequence of the weaponization of social media, which tapped into grievances which may have been real. They could have been manufactured narratives. And that's something which should worry all of us, because there is a capacity gap between the aspirations of the people and what governments are able to deliver. And when I talk about governments, I'm not talking about the current government, but I'm talking about government in a continuum. And that mismatch will always remain, because of the simple reason that contrary to what people may believe, the footprint of the government actually on the ground is fairly a light footprint. It is not really a very heavy footprint. And so therefore you've seen 3 regime changes in South Asia over the past 3 years or 4 years now. And that's something which we need to be very cognizant about. Nobody's really gone very deeply into the fact whether these were real organic movements which had sprung up from the ground, or they were narratives which were driven because of extraneous reasons. Right? Grievances may have been real, but the weaponization of those grievances is something which I don't think anybody has seriously applied their minds to. So therefore, that's a worry. See, insofar as Pakistan and China are concerned, we've had issues with them now going back, many, many decades. So therefore, we are able to manage what I say a cold peace in our neighborhood. But this challenge.
So this is essentially the Gen Z protesters, as they were called, and the protests being called Gen Z protests.
Well, you saw Arab Spring also. And you read Hillary Clinton's book called Hard Choices. And Hillary Clinton has a chapter in that book where she says as to how these activists, even the ones, in Ukraine later, how they were trained in these social media mobilization camps. And that is not to suggest that the United States is involved in any manner in what happened in our neighborhood. But all I'm trying to say is that somebody needs to very deeply look at what happened in these three countries and really discern as to how much was it organic and how much was it really driven by extraneous interests.
Since you have spoken about technology, in particular, and the changing face of war, in the warfare chapter, you describe drones and cyber as rewiring the battlefield, but insist that the future of warfare will continue to be human and that technology and economics are drivers of trends but not determinants. How should India then avoid this trap?
So here's a question which I've been asking for the last 7-8 years and to which I have no answer. At what point in time does a cyber attack become an act of war which qualifies for a response in the conventional space? What is that inflection point? Is it when your grids go down? Is it when things become even far more serious than that? And this is not a challenge that we are confronting alone. So therefore, technology has completely and absolutely transformed the battlefield. In fact, the greatest battle in the future is going to be in the cognitive domain. It's going to be a battle for the mind space. And the manner in which artificial intelligence especially is being developed, evolved, even weaponized to a great extent, would the human interface become really irrelevant? There's a company called Rhombus Power. I don't know whether you've heard of it. So Rhombus Power is a Silicon Valley startup. It's run by an Indian. It's an Indian entrepreneur who created it. They predicted the Russian invasion of Ukraine 4 months before it actually happened. They were just off by 1 day. And so therefore they looked at almost 5 trillion bits of data. And they mapped out a trend and said that, look, this war is, this invasion is coming. It's another matter that people in government, whichever the government might have been, well, they did not take it very seriously. So the conundrum is that while you want to be the master of technology, but you have to also at the same time admit that technology may be sharper than you. So the question is, where do you draw the line, which is start listening to what data is telling you and stop listening to what your mind is telling you? Or if you try and fit the data into your interpretive space, you might end up miscalculating completely. So in the coming decades, this balance between the application of the human mind and the immense kind of power which technology brings to the table is really going to be the most interesting challenge.
But this is also a human problem of strategy. Or do you think it's not even human?
Well, ultimately everything is a human problem, because you see, you cannot be putting every decision in an autonomous mode, right? So therefore you are not going to allow machines to make what they say kill decisions for you. I mean, there is a certain moral compass which humanity still has. So you would not want to outsource all those decisions to a machine. But the nimbleness of the skill will lie. At what point in time do you start or stop listening to that machine?
So it's the time of monsters, as you call it.
Well, in the sense, one world order has collapsed. The other is yet to be born. As Antonio Gramsci said, we live in an age of monsters.
Yes, so the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born. Now is the time of monsters, and that you add that India must stand as a steadfast lighthouse, steered by a beacon of national interest, and that's where the challenge is coming because of the new global world order.
Look, India, has a extremely robust democratic tradition. At a point in time when you have nations which have keeled over, India, with all its problems, all its contradictions, the kind of politics that we've been seeing over the past one decade, still continues to be that beacon. But if we push it too far, and what worries me is, pushing the entire spectre of religious polarization to an extent where it weakens our social fabric so immeasurably that we are not able to retrieve it. And we think because it gives us electoral dividends, we can continue pushing the envelope. But there is a limit to that. And so therefore, if India wants to believe, or India believes that it has a certain exceptionalism in the world of today, it wants to preserve and protect its strategic autonomy, it wants to really engage with the world on its own terms, the strength is going to come from internal cohesion. The strength is not going to come from anywhere outside. And that's where we need to focus upon. You see, in another 21 years, we would be 100. In another 23 years, China would be 100. Whether you like it or not, and this is not I saying it, even the External Affairs Minister has said it, you have a 5:1 differential, a power differential between India and China across the board. For you, really, these years, for India, which is what I worry about, this is the space for consolidation. And if we fritter it away in this very intrinsic he said, she said, which is the staple of our public life today, then I'm afraid the ship would have sailed.
Then what happens to diplomacy being more about continuity?
Well, see, there are strategic continuums. So, Prime Minister Nehru conceptualized non-alignment. There were two world wars. Right? There was devastation, destruction, imperialism was in retreat, colonialism was in retreat. The nations of Asia and Africa were looking for a third way. Prime Minister Nehru gave them a third way. And that held the field from 1947 till 1962, when the Chinese War happened. And when the Chinese War happened, we asked the Americans for help. And within the next 9 years, we had signed a treaty of peace and friendship with the Soviet Union. We had gone the entire 9 yards because that is what our national interest dictated. And till 1990, we were leaning on the Soviet side, though we were theoretically non-aligned, and in 1990 the Soviet Union collapsed. And then we started looking west, and now we have difficulties with the West. So therefore, when I see the narrative from the government, the so-called multi-alignment, multi-alignment is nothing but Nehru's alignment, without giving Nehru ownership of it. Similarly, when you talk about Atmanirbharta, what is Atmanirbharta? It is the self-reliance of late Prime Minister Mrs. Gandhi. Before, when she started the Green Revolution and didn't want to be humiliated in the capitals of the world. And what is Atmanirbharta? So there are strategic continuums in India's strategic thought, because ultimately, howsoever any government might experiment, this is the median which you come back to. And so therefore, rather than experimenting, if you go down that path, give it the kind of torque it requires, it will give you the strategic autonomy that you're looking for.
My last question, and this is for on the behalf of several aspiring authors in this audience, what makes a practicing lawyer, a sitting member of parliament, to publish books? And what drives him? I mean, you've published 4 books already, and this is the 5th.
If I was able to answer that question, I would have definitely answered it. But the one thing I tell myself every time I write a book and release it, that this one is the last. I am not going to do the next one. So yeah, I mean, see, the one thing which putting pen to paper does is that it brings a lot of integrity to your thought process. So I guess it's more about, your thinking things through, which really drives you to write. So yeah, so that's ended up producing 4 or 5 books. But as I said,
This is the last one.
well, if I can draw the line, I would want to.
All right. Thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you to the audience as well.